Welcome to the Success in Africa podcast with Dr. Modupe, your weekly dose of leadership vitamins to make you successful in Africa.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Success in Africa Leadership Podcast. My name is Dr. Modupe Taylor Pierce, and I am a scholar and a practitioner of leadership and organizational development. Simply put, I study what makes people successful. I have been doing this for 3 decades with a particular focus on people in Africa. And in this podcast, I share stories, lessons, and insights about people having success right here in Africa. Why do I do this? Because I have a vision for Africa. I have a vision of Africa becoming a high-income continent by the year 2040. And for that to happen, I need you and every other African listening to this podcast to become successful. So, if you want to be successful in Africa, I encourage you, like and subscribe to this podcast. This episode is brought to you courtesy of BCA Online, the one-stop shop for mastering leadership. Joining BCA Online is free, and it gives you access to countless hours of knowledge, videos, and a plethora of resources on leadership that will help you to enhance your capacity and performance. If you have questions that you want me to answer after watching this video, just log on to BCA Online. The link is on the screen, and post your questions there. That is where I will respond to your questions. Today, I'm continuing on the 5-part series that I started last week on culture. If you recall, we talked about the 5 cultural behaviors that hold us back as Africans and as a continent from being truly successful. Culture is the sum total of behaviors that are rewarded plus behaviors that are tolerated minus behaviors that are punished. In every community, there is culture. Whether white, black, African, Asian, every community has culture. Every family has culture. Every business has culture. Every organization has culture. Every one of these places have behaviors that are rewarded, behaviors that are tolerated, and you will notice an absence of behaviors that are punished. It's very common when you go to a place, etc., you ask about, hey, how do I fit in here? And you're told, hey, if you want to be successful, do more of this and don't do this. That is culture. Now, in Africa, there are quite a few common cultural characteristics across various tribes, countries, etc. And many of them are absolutely laudable. But in this 5-part series, I have identified 5 of them, which while we hold them very close, while we cherish them, they are holding us back from prosperity. So, last week, we talked about the first of them. And these are not in any order of importance. But the first one was reverence for seniority. If you missed that, I encourage you to go back and look into that episode, reverence for seniority. So, today, the second one that we're going to look at is weddings and funerals. Weddings and funerals. Now, before folks start to say, oh my goodness, this guy is crazy, let me just make it clear. I understand that these are cherished things, and I am also an African. But I am intent on you being successful. I'm intent on you being prosperous. And I have come to the conclusion, having done the research, that our proclivity for overspending on weddings and funerals is one of the key reasons why we continue to be impoverished. You see, across Africa, these two occasions are guaranteed to unite families and bring people together. I mean, they are treasured. People will travel long distances, endure inconvenience, make sacrifices just to be present. But the reality is, when compared based on our per capita income, which is our earnings, to other communities, Africans far overspend on weddings and funerals. Let me give you a very personal illustration. In the year 1998, my wife and I were married. We were both young immigrants in the United States, Africans. I had a good job. I had graduated from Cornell University as well as West Point, and I was working in corporate America. My wife was also working, and we had lots of family, but not too much. Most of the family was based in Africa. A few were based in America. We also had friends, some white friends, Italian Americans, Alex and Noreen. They also got married the same year. They were friends of ours. We would go on double dates. He also did the master's program at Cornell with me. And we were close enough to speak candidly with each other. So, as we were planning our weddings, or discussing them really, I think we got married about 2 months apart from each other. Alex asked me how much we were budgeting for our wedding, and I told him that I was hoping to keep it under $20,000. This is in 1998. He was stunned. He said, "What?" He said, No. We're going to spend only about 8,000. What are you spending so much money on it? And when we looked into it, he then revealed that they were going to have about 60, 70 guests. I said, He asked me, he says, how many guests are you expecting? I said, I'm trying to keep it under 200. Alex was aghast. He challenged me directly, as any good friend would do. He said, Modupe, I know you, I know Renee, I know your wife. You guys don't have more than 50 friends. Cut your wedding list, cut your guest list to 80, 90 maximum. Cut your spending to 10,000. Take that other 10,000, put it away, invest it. By the time you guys are celebrating your 20th anniversary, that 10,000 will probably be worth $300,000. It would have grown, and it will help to secure your retirement. You know what? I understood Alex's logic. In fact, he and I went to the same business school classes together. We understood the time value of money. I knew he was right. And yet, guess how many guests we had at our wedding? 280. Why? Because of culture. Both my wife's parents and my parents insisted on inviting long lists of people, friends, distant relatives, individuals who had known them decades earlier. Some of them were people I didn't even really know or wasn't in contact with. Could we have said no to this? Yeah, we could have. But doing so would have violated some deeply held cultural expectations and, frankly, probably invited some social sanctions. So I succumbed to African culture. Despite living and getting married in the United States, I succumbed. Fast forward 25 years. our outcomes were very different. Me and my wife, Alex and his wife. Alex retired early. The cash flow from his investments exceeded his annual expenses. He had started investing from the time of his wedding. And at our 25th anniversary, my wife and I were still working. Not because we had invested less than Alex and Noreen. It wasn't that our expenses were so much higher than them, but because we had invested less. So therefore, 25 years later, Alex and Noreen could afford to retire, but Modupe could not. That outcome was the outcome based on a single decision made in 1998. This pattern, folks, repeats itself across Africa. In weddings and in funerals. In countries like Ghana, funeral spending is extraordinarily high. Nigeria is another example. Families borrow money from banks to bury their dead. Some funerals last weeks and even months. Some people do GoFundMe campaigns. Not for education or for healthcare, but for burial ceremonies. The cost of burial itself does not need to be excessive. But we insist on multiple events, elaborate receptions, uniforms, as in Ashwabi, feeding large crowds, all in the name of honoring the dead. And yet, do you know what? The dead do not care how many people attend the funeral. I have never seen a corpse sit up in a casket and look around and complain about the attendance. Folks, this is not an argument against community, nor against gathering. I understand weddings and funerals serve important social functions as reunions, as points of connection. The question is whether we can preserve these benefits without impoverishing ourselves. Because while we are spending significantly more on weddings and funerals than people in wealthier countries, at the same time, every year we are approaching these same wealthier countries asking for assistance to balance our budgets, to feed our children, to provide healthcare, and to educate our youth. Does this really make sense? Last year, on the occasion of the death of my parents, 28 years after I got married, I finally gathered the courage to stand my ground against culture. I share this because I want you to know that what I'm sharing is not easy to do. But at the end of the day, if you want to have different outcomes from what your father, your grandfather had, you have to learn to do something different. I stood up to family expectations and I refused to engage in some of the areas of unnecessary spending of resources to satisfy my relatives, uncles, aunties, etc., and some of my parents' friends. For example, one of the cultural aspects that I pushed back on was the cost of keeping the family house, where the mourners would come, open all day and all evening and providing food all day to these guests. Despite the grumblings of some of the relatives, I am quite satisfied that my parents were still buried in a dignified way without our family having to go out of pocket in order to bury them. If we desire higher life expectancy, success, prosperity for future generations, we must examine our behaviors that have produced the current outcomes. You see, our proclivity for overspending on weddings and funerals, it's really a symptom of our short-term thinking and decision-making. In most African cultures, we place lower priority on future earnings than on current earnings and consumption. And it is this misplaced priority, this penchant for foregoing the future in favor of the present, that leads us to poverty and robs us of our dreams and success. My fellow Africans, awareness creates choice. There are countless small businesses whose growth has been stunted because their founders were unable or unwilling to resist the pressure to spend money that belonged to the business on a family wedding or funeral. There are thousands of Africans who have mortgaged their future success, like I did, by giving in to the demands of their close family and relatives to contribute money that they barely have towards a family wedding or a funeral. I'm not advocating the banishing of weddings and funerals. I'm simply advising you that if you want to be successful in Africa, you are going to need to develop the courageous muscle to say no to the overspending of money at your own wedding or your close family's wedding or your close relative's funeral. Remember that for a wedding, the couple have decades of living to do after the euphoria of the wedding day. And as for a funeral, the dead have never ever complained about how much money was spent at their funeral. If Africa is to become a high-income continent, which means that Africans are to become prosperous, then we Africans need to learn to curtail our spending on short-term satisfaction in favor of investing for long-term success and prosperity. And this transition, folks, starts with you. Grab the courage. Make the change. Your future self will thank you. Your future, your grandchildren will be grateful to you. Folks, we've come to the end of today's episode. I hope you've learned a bit about success in Africa and some of the things, the tough choices we have to make in order to be successful. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like the video. Tell your friends about it, because together we can transform our beloved continent of Africa. See you next week.
Tomorrow belongs to those people who prepare for it today. See you next week.